We just reached Plutus version 2, and things are looking very good on that front. But now we have to turn our attention to the remaining two eras of Cardano, Basho and Voltaire, which represent scaling and governance. These initiatives are, of course, intertwined, and they've both already been underway for some time. We've already experienced Cardano governance with Catalyst, and Cardano scaling has been helped along massively already by the network parameter updates earlier this year and the massive improvements, namely CIPs 31 through 33 and pipelining brought to us by Vasil. But we already know there's a lot more coming. Today, the Basho half of that future was laid out in much greater detail than we've ever seen, and the future is definitely looking bright. Ready? Let's go. Today, we're going to discuss the recent video from Charles on Basho, a new partnership for World Mobile, a brand new Fiat on-ramp in Cardano, the amazing capacity of a single Cardano transaction, and a court ruling in the CFTC Ooki DAO case that has some a little concerned. If you saw this image and thought to yourself, what? Are you revealing to us the picture of Basho that they blockicized and used for the logo of the Basho era in the Cardano roadmap? Why, yes, that's exactly what I'm doing. Or if you're finding value in these videos each weekday, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies stake pool. I would really appreciate it if you would consider delegating. Ticker AOS. Today, Charles dropped another one of his gigantic whiteboard videos. In this one, we learned more about Basho than we've ever seen before. This video connects a bunch of different components of Basho that I think maybe we hadn't even really been told were going to work together, and it just creates a unified framework to think about how scaling in Cardano is going to work. I love these videos. Logan the Lobster is there. The safe is there. The masks are there. The samurai armor's there. The fisting of destiny, or whatever you guys call that glove, that gauntlet thing, it's there. It's there too. Charles says we're getting close to Mithril V1, and he describes Mithril as an overlay on top of layer 1. We'll get back to this concept of what is and what is not going to be an overlay on top of layer 1. But he describes Mithril as an overlay on top of layer 1 that creates proof certificates, which is super useful so that you can do off-chain things. He gives the example of voting and then aggregate them into something like a threshold signature in the case of voting that can be committed to the L1 in a single transaction on-chain with the same trust assurances as if you committed all, say, 3 million votes. So far, we've just been talking about using Mithril for light clients and fast bootstrapping. But Charles points out that Mithril is really part of this many-to-one concept in Cardano that we also see in Plutus V2 with reference inputs and reference scripts, in the sense that they can be committed to the chain once and referenced many times repeatedly. On Hydra, Charles says a lot of people seem to think that Hydra is also an overlay on the L1 that will act as some kind of accelerator network with a bunch of Hydra heads run by SPOs talking to each other, kind of akin to the Lightning Network in Bitcoin. But Hydra is actually dApp embedded software. So this is a pretty big shift. I think almost all the descriptions of Hydra I've ever heard about were definitely describing sort of a variant very similar to the Lightning Network, and that obviously has some limitations. So he says Plutus is created to embody on-chain Plutus scripts and off-chain infrastructure. Hydra would be part of that off-chain infrastructure and serve the many-to-one concept in a kind of backchain function similar to Mithril for things like DEXs and voting. So basically, the Hydra heads will be embedded in the dApps to bundle things so that operations costs go down for these dApps and speeds can go up. Some dApp developers are already working with IOHK's Hydra team, and Obsidian is one of these dApp developers, and they're already making open source commits to Hydra, which Charles is really excited about. He says when an entity like Obsidian comes along and they want to make open source commits to a project like Hydra, you know you're on the right track. You're doing something that's going to be valuable to the dApp developer community. Components of Mithril could also connect to Hydra as well one day. So this is an interesting sort of reframing of Hydra, because if Hydra was just going to be this Lightning Network-esque, you know, overlay on top of the base layer, then it really is limited to things like, you know, microtransactions between a set number of participants in the sort of Hydra head, who would be doing transactions over and over with each other. And this has been one of the big criticisms we've heard of Hydra. People were just envisioning Hydra being used by parties who are transacting back and forth with each other, you know, routinely. And that obviously limits the use cases for Hydra. But the idea of embedding it in a dApp definitely changes perspective on what Hydra could be used for. If you're confused at this point about the difference between Mithril and Hydra, just remember that Mithril is an overlay on top of the base layer, while Hydra is something that's going to be inside the dApps. Next, Charles talked about input endorsers, which are sort of the big guns in this scaling initiative. And he said input endorsers won't even be necessary in 2023 because the improvements to Plutus plus pipelining plus Mithril plus Hydra will give us more bandwidth than we'll even need in 2023. This is something that John Woods said on a Cardano 360 months and months ago. It was surprising to hear it then, and it's surprising to hear it now. But now that I've heard it from both John Woods and Charles, and I think about the improvements in throughput from Plutus V2, pipelining, Mithril, and Hydra, it's starting to seem pretty believable. Charles says they've been writing the CIPs for input endorsers for a long time, and they've been doing a lot of simulations. He talked about some get-togethers of the various researchers involved with input endorsers in, I believe, California and maybe also in Scotland. But they've sort of had multiple conferences dealing just with input endorsers, or at least dealing with input endorsers. And they've been formulating how they're going to attack this for a long time. Charles calls input endorsers a complete reimagining of the structure of a blockchain. Basically, with input endorsers, you end up doing a lot of things asynchronously and in parallel as input blocks, and then you batch them together as key blocks. This is this concept of the tiny, quick heartbeats in between the big heartbeats. John Woods described it that way originally, and it sounded something like this: boom, 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 boom. Those little heartbeats are the input blocks, where you're sort of doing a lot of things, not necessarily, you know, in any kind of synchrony, but you're doing them in parallel all at the same time. And then the big heartbeats are these key blocks where you batch together all those little heartbeats and they're included in that key block. This results in apparently what Charles calls gargantuan throughput numbers, since it results in continuous execution of scripts, whereas right now on the current blockchain, execution of scripts computation is just 0.25% of the block budget. So we'd be going from 0.25% of the block budget for computation, execution of scripts, to this situation with input endorsers where we have continuous execution of scripts. Charles says what we're talking about here is not just a 10x increase in throughput, it's some hugely significant increase. Obviously, he's not putting a number on that, but I remember John Woods was saying something like, you can basically do as many transactions per second as you want. You know, maybe that's a little bit of hyperbole, but it sounds like from all the descriptions, we're talking about gigantic throughput. Mithril and Hydra will be very busy in 2023 since they will be components in input endorsers. Input endorsers would allow us to scale for maybe the next decade. So we're talking about a step forward that's so big that even in the very fast-moving blockchain space, it would allow us to continue to scale for something like a decade. In November, they'll announce the CIPs that cover all this leading up to input endorsers and start a community conversation about all this. So they're going to ask the community to ratify whatever ends up being the final design of input endorsers, since it would change the logic for SPOs. It would introduce different reward mechanisms. It'll introduce things like Babel fees and tiered fees, and it'll change how staking works. So these are obviously really big fundamental changes to the blockchain, and Charles is acknowledging that this isn't something that IOHK can do unilaterally. This is something the community has to do together. This is all going to require Voltaire, and it's going to be a bit of a long process. Charles says they'll also introduce side chains bootstrapped from Ouroboros by a BFT quorum of SPOs. This will involve bridges of the side chains, and it'll take even more pressure off the base layer. They'll also be able to have different sets of logic and focus for these side chains, like an EVM focused side chain or a privacy based side chain. Charles points out that the SPOs and their delegates would be paid for their efforts for helping to run these side chains, and that the most probable form of payment would be the coins of the side chain. So given all of these different things going on in Basho, you can see Basho looks complicated, ambitious, but very, very promising. I think we've got a lot to be excited about in terms of Basho, really over the next several years. This is great. On Voltaire, Charles says that at the Cardano Summit, he's going to do a huge presentation on governance and Voltaire. This will cover the constitution that needs to be written, the members-based organization, and all of those things. Charles wants to see tricameral governance of Cardano controlled by the community in 2023. Let me say that again. Charles wants to see tricameral governance of Cardano next year. This will stand in stark contrast to Ethereum, which Charles says has rejected on-chain governance at the advice of dear leader Vitamin Butters, living my best life, rejecting on-chain governance. But that's not all that happened in Cardano today. We also got this news from World Mobile. We're partnering with Immunify Life. This partnership will include the deployment of Immunify's blockchain-based healthcare app to the World Mobile ecosystem, offering additional utility and services to users on the World Mobile network. World Mobile seems to be on fire with these partnerships, and it doesn't surprise me. When you think about the mission of World Mobile, to bring a blockchain-based telecom network to parts of the world where traditional telecoms are unwilling, basically refuse to go. And then you look at the fact that they're already putting up this network on the ground, and they've got real people in real life on the ground already using the network. How about a Fiat on-ramp right inside the Cardano ecosystem? Eternl has this to say: Cardano fans from the USA can now buy ADA via the Buy ADA button in Eternl using their credit card. A few states are excluded for now, though. I don't know which states are excluded yet. This is the Gardarian function that we reported on previously. Gardarian saying, we are thrilled to provide a great choice of crypto to buy with Visa and MasterCard. I clicked on the buy button just to see what kinds of exchange rates they were quoting. The rates looked pretty normal to me. They look like normal rates. I mean, sometimes when you see something that looks so convenient, you automatically assume there's going to be some kind of gigantic surcharge. I don't know what other fees are tacked on, but when I saw the conversion rate that they were offering, it seemed to match something that seemed reasonable in my head. But I didn't actually complete any transactions or anything like that. So if you have used the Buy ADA button in Eternl to actually buy ADA, let me know what fees were included. Were the fees good? Were the fees bad? Exorbitant? Just fine? Let me know your experience if you've actually used this Buy ADA button. Have you ever found yourself wondering, is the Cardano network an excellent, excellent network? Well, if you've ever had that question, NIDO, who is among us in the Army of Spies, has the answer. He says, I just sent 77 assets on Cardano in one transaction, and it took a couple of seconds and cost me 0.28 ADA. What is that, like 12 cents right now? So he sent 77 assets in one transaction, and it cost about 12 cents. Here are screenshots for proof. Here's something you should probably know about if you are interested in Cardano metaverses, and especially if you bought Artifact Moon parcels. It's kind of funny. We haven't talked about Artifact Moon in a long time, but I mentioned it yesterday because Artifact Moon is where I bought a couple of parcels to provide us with moon bases. Then I saw this post from the Artifact Discord. So this post says, "We are strung due to funding. This is also compounded by the state of the market and further time restricted by events off screen. Currently, they mentioned that market share of their marketplace, the Artifact marketplace, sits at around 0.01% since launch, a grand total of 69,000 ADA in sales and 1,720 ADA in fees. Our model was simple. Sadly, this model has not reached anything near sustainable and have had to revert back to self-funding the project in recent months. Development has near halted to remain lean, and during this bear market, focus on staying afloat." I'm just reading a few selected excerpts here. So if you want the full story, you should definitely come read this post. It continues, though. We speak of purpose a lot. Little point existing without funding is relatively trivial, but I have given pivot and purpose a lot of thought, as have the team, including yourself. I don't know who he's addressing there, but he and the team have given pivoting a lot of thought. There are three paths forward I see. And this is not any kind of message to me. This is just an announcement in the Discord. There are three paths forward I see for purpose or use of any funding we might do. Create a solid market strategy and further development on the marketplace. Discontinue the marketplace altogether and use this cost of operations toward building a new product, or only focus on Moon. Build funding to develop this solely and ignore any other purpose. Focus development around revenue streams first, upcycling skills and tools already built from the marketplace. Would be interested in hearing the community's thoughts in chat and voting on the above, reactions below, to give the team some food for thought. Of course, this is the elevator version and just a conversation starter. Any of the above would include detailed planning and costing analysis forward. And you can see of the three possible options, 1, 2, and 3, people voted overwhelmingly for number 3, just focus on the Moon metaverse. I have no idea how this is going to turn out, but wanted everybody to be aware, because we've talked about Artifact Moon on this channel. I wanted everybody to be aware that this is going on in Artifact Moon. And if you're a part of their Discord, you may want to go over here and have your voice heard in this vote. Looks like overwhelmingly, though, people are voting only focus on Moon. Again, this is just another example of what I've always said on this channel about these metaverse projects, and that's that any of these projects, no matter how polished they seem, any of these projects could fail at any time. We don't know what's going to happen with the Artifact Moon project, but hopefully they decide to go with number 3, in my humble opinion, and build out something great for us to all use. You probably remember a few episodes back, we talked about the CFTC going after Ooki DAO because they said it was an unincorporated association which had violated federal laws around offering leveraged and margin trading products by refusing to register as a futures commission merchant and by not having a KYC program. So this is obviously interesting to anybody who's interested in blockchains or crypto right now, because DAOs are starting to flourish. And part of the thing around DAOs was, who would regulators go after? How would they go after them? Who would they even serve? So according to this article, in the case so far, no attorney has filed to join the case to defend Ooki DAO or any of its members. So the CFTC so far has been kind of, going through the case unopposed. There's no attorney on the other side representing the DAO. And one of the questions before the court was whether or not the CFTC had sufficiently served notice on the DAO members by posting in the DAO forums and in the DAO help chat box. Because obviously there's no counsel to file any kind of a response on behalf of the DAO, the CFTC, it looks like, has now won that part of the case. The court came back today and said that the CFTC's service on the DAO members was sufficient through the forums and the help chat box. This was also the same day that LexPunk, a collective group of lawyers and developers active in the crypto sector, you've probably seen their members post on Twitter before, asked the judge for permission to join the case as a friend of the court. Apparently, this was a little bit too late to help out with this service question. But if you're interested in DAOs in crypto in general, you probably want to keep an eye on this case, because so far it's not going too well for the Ooki DAO members. So look out if you're in a DAO. Otherwise, I hope you are having a great week, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.